We are now live on YouTube. Am I audible? Ready to go? Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Great. Good morning to all joining us today from New Delhi and different parts of India and the globe. We do have some international participants too. I am Manish Dabhade here, and I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of the Indian Futures. I take this opportunity to welcome you all today on behalf of the Indian Futures. I cannot but begin by hoping that you and your loved ones are safe and healthy. Let me at the outset, as I always do, introduce the Indian Futures very briefly. We are a New Delhi-based independent media organization that started out in January 2017 with the sole aim of creating a global platform to plainly and dispassionately discuss, in the truest ancient Indian tradition of a samvad, a dialogue, the ideas of New India in all their varied dimensions and contestations. The idea is to go beyond the headlines of the day and have an honest, deep dive conversation amongst the thinking community in India and abroad. The idea is to organize, probe, stimulate, and at times provoke the innermost mind on a contemporary theme of relevance to India and the world. We are extremely proud to have recently hosted some of India's finest minds from the world of government, politics, academia, diplomacy, and culture. Dr. Vinay Sahasrabudhe, President of ICCR, Shri Devendra Fadnavis, former CM of Maharashtra, Shri Sunil Ambekarji from the RSS, Shri J. Nandakumar, Shri Gurumurthy ji, and BJP General Secretaries Shri B.L. Santosh, Shri P. Muralidhar Rao, Ms. Saroj Pandey, and Shri Ram Madhav from the BJP, obviously, Ambassador P.S. Raghavan, who's chairman of the NSAB, Ambassador Vijay.
Manish, you need to unmute yourself. You've gone on mute.
Yeah, am I audible, sir, now?
Yes, you're audible now.
Oh, great. Yeah, thank you. So we had, I've just mentioned a few names, including Professor Makarand Paranjpe, who's the director of at Indian Institute of Advanced Study, Shimla. And we recently started, and I'm very happy to let you all know, our Maharashtra chapter in Marathi, which is called Sahyadri Samvad, our flagship lecture series. Today's next 120 minutes or so session is dedicated to Aatmanirbhar Bharat in a changing geo-economic order. This mission, Abhiyan, which was announced by Prime Minister Modi on May 12th this year, in the midst of the corona pandemic raging in almost every part of the globe. India obviously too is battling this with all its might, individually and collectively, at the government level, and of course at the societal levels. No doubt it has generated a debate, a very noisy one for sure, on how it's playing out at global, international, national, subnational, and at the smallest levels of human interactions in diverse arenas: economics, politics, society, and culture, individual and group behavior, throwing up very fundamental questions on the ways of life we have been living all these earlier years and even decades. It's led to questioning of some very basic assumptions on democracy, on globalization, and economic integration and interdependence and the future. Prime Minister Modi has been very categorical and emphasized at every public opportunity, including from the ramparts of Red Fort on Independence Day on August 15th, that, and again I quote him, India's self-reliance will be based on 5 pillars: economy, infrastructure, technology-driven system, a vibrant demography, and demand. When India speaks of self-reliance, it does not advocate for a self-centered system. In India's self-reliance, there is a concern for the whole world's happiness, cooperation, and peace. Unquote. As we begin deliberations in a couple of minutes, I would like to seek answers to some very basic questions. For example, are we seeing a return of geoeconomics and statecraft in addition to geopolitics? Are we now moving to see economic instruments from positive sum to a zero-sum logic now? It's surely not a new state of affairs when we can see how state-aided capitalism and globally integrated economies are pushing changes in geo-economic order. Key questions on geoeconomics order in geoeconomic order thus emerge. Where are the new theaters What are the new instruments? What are the new ways these instruments are used again to achieve geopolitical goals? India is actively witnessing that at its borders. Again, coming to India, what are India's geoeconomic endowments? How these can be effectively harnessed come to mind instantly. To take us through this very complex set of issues, we have been extremely lucky, extremely fortunate to assemble a stellar panel from academia and industry that will surely have most definitive answers to these questions. I begin now, obviously, with welcoming you all today, but also our chair, Shri Dilip Chinoy, who is the Secretary General of FICCI, a leading industry body in India since April 2018. He was earlier the Managing Director and CEO of National Skill Development Corporation, a public-private partnership formed in 2010 till 2015. He spearheaded NSDC for 5 years, which aims to skill 150 million Indians by 2022, and hence contributed in harnessing India's demographic dividend. Prior to NSDC, he was associated with CII for 19 years and served as the regional director for Southern Region. In 2004, he joined Society of Indian Automobile Manufacturers as Director General. With this, I now hand over to today's chair, and I would like to profusely, at the outset itself, thank him for readily agreeing to be an associate partner with us for organizing this international symposium. Over to you, Chinoy, sir.
Thank you, Manish, for that opening remarks and introduction. Just want to state that it's a pleasure to be here. And one of the ideas of partnering with India Futures was really because, a lot of wealth and experience and knowledge and different types of, viewpoints are available in various sections of society, whether it is think tanks or academia, or even some of our very senior diplomats and others who have actually seen the world. And the idea here was to really, get their viewpoints and enable, practitioners on the ground to understand, as you so rightly put it, both the geopolitics and the geoeconomics of what is happening here. A lot of comments are actually being made, in relation to March. But in the Indian context, this whole importance of being Aatmanirbhar, or having a separate, value chain, actually came in early February, when, because of the pandemic, global supply chains were disruptive. And it was actually analyzed that India was dependent on very specific countries for very key ingredients, whether it is the pharmaceutical side or whether it is on the equipment side, or the solar energy side. And over 33 sectors were actually impacted in different things, and we had to seek alternate sources and supply chains because the access to existing supply chain was not available. And then as it progressed, you saw that different countries actually then looking at, in battling the COVID, trying to ensure healthcare supplies for themselves. And then there was a shortage, and therefore you had to have the Indian economy pivoting, and where we hardly made any masks or ventilators or PPEs, you had to get even self-help groups at the local village level get into their production so that we could meet the demand in India. And then, of course, now we are at a very interesting situation where we can actually export here. In addition to that, there has been now in the whole attempt discovery of the vaccine, different types of international cooperation, looking at productionizing the vaccine, how it happens, what are the new international alignments, the new partnerships there. And within all of this, even while India was trying to manage its whole healthcare scenario, there were about 150 other countries where India actually assisted and gave them either supplies or helped them to address the situations arising of the COVID pandemic. So if you see, the whole international cooperation architecture. And actually today, as we are here, later in the day, you will see, you will hear the address of the UN. And how do the international organizations actually align to COVID? And I've been attending the WIPO annual meeting digitally. Now, can the COVID and the digital experience here find a new way of democratizing access and ensuring greater participation in international organizations? Will the nature and the type of attendance and the whole discussion, will it actually be structured very differently? These are some of the things that I'm sure that we will hear today in the panel discussion. We have a great panel, and I think Manish wants to have the opportunity to introduce all the panelists there. So Manish, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chunai sir. We have obviously a stellar panel, and we would begin with Ambassador Mohan Kumar. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, as you all know, is the chairman of Research and Information System for Developing Countries, obviously RIS, since June 2018. He's a leading, and obviously all of you know that RIS is a leading Delhi-based think tank, which engages in policy research relating to trade, technology, investment, development, connectivity, and South-South cooperation. He has had an outstanding career in the Indian Foreign Service, lasting 36 years, which culminated in his posting as India's ambassador to France, based in Paris. Ambassador Kumar is a francophone and a francophile. He is also, most importantly, a professor of diplomatic practice at the Jindal School of International Affairs, Sonipat, since August 2017. He's also a dean in charge of global initiatives and institution building at the above school. Obviously, all of you know his expertise includes diplomatic practice and policy, foreign policy, multilateral trade negotiations, climate change negotiations, globalization and academia. Ambassador Kumar is author of a very, in fact, I do suggest it and always recommend it in my course on international negotiations. His book by Palgrave Macmillan, Negotiation Dynamics of the WTO, an Insider's Account. We are extremely lucky, sir, to have you with us. Ambassador Mohan Kumar has always been very supportive, very encouraging in our initiatives. So it's great to have you back with us, sir. So over to you, Ambassador Kumar.
Thank you very much, Manishji, and I want to thank both the Indian Futures and the FICCI for this singular opportunity and on a timely topic as well. So I think I will not waste too much time, since you and both you and Mr. Dilip Chinoy, I think, dwelt at some length about the emerging international architecture, also about the kind of issues that India may face. So let me begin by at least saying what Aatmanirbharta or Aatmanirbhar scheme is not about. To my mind, it is not about autarkic self-reliance. And an autarkic self-reliance would mean that you're turning inward, you're turning protectionist, you are increasing barriers for international trade, and you are just going to remove yourself or disintegrate from the global trading system or even the international trading architecture. So that is not it. And I think the Prime Minister has said on more than one occasion, I will have a chance to quote him at one or two places, but it's clear to me that it is not autarkic self-reliance. If it is not autarkic self-reliance, then what is it? Before we get into that, I also want to say it's interesting that the Chinese have their version of Aatmanirbharta, if you like, through the dual circulation economy that has also caught on in China since, let's say, January, February, very recently. Their Aatmanirbharta, if I may say, is defensive. So the self-reliance that we are talking about from China's context is defensive because they need to face up to the decoupling that's happening. So they are having to perforce depend on the domestic market. And since they are... Okay, I don't know what I did there, but anyway, I'll continue. So what I was saying is, I think China, in China's case, they are the factory of the world, and they need to now depend on their domestic market, not out of choice, but out of necessity. Similarly, you also have the resilient supply chain initiative. We will return to it as well. And that is one aspect, I think, of Aatmanirbharta as well. So I think we need to distinguish between an Aatmanirbharta that's inward looking and defensive. And to my mind, our Aatmanirbharta, it seems to me, is more outward going and offensive. And I hope we can agree on that and then build on it. The important thing, of course, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. At the end of the day, we need to succeed in what we are doing. Having said that, in some areas, it is hard to deny that it is self-reliance, pure and simple. For example, if you take the example of defense, it is my honest view that it's not a bad idea to be self-reliant for India, because we are spending so much on acquisition of hardware and other things in the area of defense, that if we can somehow make these things in India for India, it's not a bad thing. Similarly, in health, it is widely agreed that you cannot depend on active pharmaceutical ingredients or antibiotics to the extent of 70 to 80% imports. This doesn't make any sense in the context of what has happened in COVID. And the country from which we are importing, by the way, has gone on to really flex its muscles and politicize these supplies. So I don't think the writing could be on the wall any clearer, frankly. So it's clear to me that in those areas, it might be a good idea to even accept that you are moving towards self-reliance, pure and simple. I wouldn't mind that at all. Similarly, agriculture. I think we've had some very important reforms over the last couple of weeks. It has pained me no end that it is becoming more and more difficult to have reforms in India without politicizing it, frankly. Everybody knows these reforms are long overdue, and yet we've had issues. And I hope we don't have those issues with regard to labor reforms, which are also crucial in my view. So it will also, I think I want to mention here that one of the things about the post-COVID scenario is how strong a state is. And the strength of a state is not just delivery of various things, but also the degree of trust that the state has vis-a-vis citizens. So for me, the relevant models are, I think, South Korea, Taiwan, New Zealand, Germany, and not necessarily China. China has a strong state, of course, but that's a different kind of state. You can't replicate it anyway in India. But if there is something that we need to aspire to, it is the strength of a state which depends not only on delivery of services to the people, but also enjoys a high degree of trust. That is something that we need if we are to carry out the Aatmanirbhar mission in full. That's at least my view. I also believe that Aatmanirbharta in the Indian context is about seeking investment. The Prime Minister has made it clear that it is local plus global. We know that we cannot go global if we don't have sufficient foreign direct investment that we are able to attract. Now, for the sake of that, I think everybody realizes you need to have labor reforms, you need to have land reforms, you need to reduce the transaction costs considerably. Again, I'm happy that we have done things in labor, we have done things in transaction costs. We need to do more, obviously, but I do believe the land reform, the land acquisition reform is critical if we are to exponentially increase investment. Some of the investment will get diverted in the post-COVID context. And I think we potentially have a huge opportunity to attract investment, which will be diverted, but it would obviously depend on a number of factors. The Resilient Supply Chains Initiative, which you mentioned, Manish ji, in your opening remarks, is also something I put in the context of Aatmanirbharta, because as the Prime Minister said, Aatmanirbharta is not about India being a passive market, but about India actually participating in global supply chains. If resilient supply chains are all about creating trust, then your point about whether we are returning to geoeconomics is an interesting one. It seems to me, yes, we are. I don't know whether the change will be permanent. I don't know with this change to what extent it will happen. Can you really dismantle some of the chains? I don't know the answer to that question. But it seems to me, at least in some areas like health, for example, people will divert. People will change existing supply chains. I mean, I always give the example of masks in France. And France, to begin with, in the incipient stages of the crisis, did not have enough masks. Not because France is not capable of producing it, because they could only produce at €1, whereas they were getting it from China for 20 cents. So I think some of those things will definitely change, it seems to me. But how much change there will be is something that India also has to monitor carefully. Coming back to India, I wouldn't lose sight of the fact that Aatmanirbharta, to me, has a predominant primary goal, which is to become a 5 trillion economy. Frankly, nothing else matters. 5 trillion economy with jobs for our people has to be the goal of Aatmanirbharta. Aatmanirbharta cannot be an artificial goal of either being open for business, improving ranks and improving exports. It doesn't make sense to me unless you have a specific target. So it seems to me a 5 trillion economy with an inclusive aspect to it in terms of jobs is an objective that is worth striving for. Now, if you take India's GDP, I mean, Professor Shamika Ravi is here and she probably will have more to say, and she certainly knows more about this than I do. But if the share of trade in India's GDP is 40%, 2019, then it makes sense that you not only worry about the 40%, but you also worry about the 60%, which is domestic. And if this 60% is going to comprise of government expenditure, consumption, and investment, among other things, then you jolly well focus on that, because it is that 60% which is going to get you to 5 trillion. Now, government stimulus, I think you can argue about the figures, but it seems to me if it is anything like 10% of GDP, it's a humongous figure. And I now hear that there is more stimulus on the way, pre-Diwali and all that. So the government stimulus, in any case, government proportion of GDP, again, subject to correction, is 10%. So it is really the consumption aspect of the India's GDP that needs to increase exponentially. How can you get people to spend more, frankly? So to some extent, I see good signs that auto vehicles and some other things are taking off. In other areas, it seems to me there is a lag. So we will see what happens. But eventually, we will have to get our house in order if we have to really talk of Aatmanirbharta. On the other 40% of the GDP, which is trade, I want to make a few comments, if you allow me. And I will begin with Manishji, what you said. Are we seeing a return to geoeconomics? It seems to me the answer is in the affirmative, because frankly, the era of non-reciprocal, MFN-based, WTO-anchored trade, I think that era is drawing to a close. You know, whichever way you look at it, what the United States has done, what China is doing, what other countries are doing, I think the era of completely non-reciprocal and MFN-based trade is over. If that is over, what is trade likely to be in the future? I think it's likely to be reciprocal, preferential, and strategic. So trade is not just going to be just-in-time manufacturing. You can make a pin. It's like the hosiery industry in the south of India, waiting for buttons and zippers to come from China and not being able to complete their export consignments in time. It's not as if India is incapable of making zippers and buttons, but that's the way it was done earlier. Because they were cheaper to import from China, the entire Tirupur industry was depending on zippers and buttons from China. That kind of thing is no longer going to happen, I think. How long it will take, I don't know. But it seems to me that you will henceforth try and be Aatmanirbhar, at least in zippers and buttons, if not in bigger things. So if this is what it is going to be, that it is going to be reciprocal, preferential, and non-MFN, what does India do? After all, we need to have a strategy. So to the east of India, it seems to me that we have FTAs. In fact, it's interesting. All our FTAs are to the east of India. There is nothing to the west of India, which to my mind is frankly a big gap that we need to bridge. You cannot just say, I'm only going to have FTAs with East, especially since many people argue that actually those economies are complementary. You are dealing with the same things. So frankly, you should be looking at the West. But if you are looking to the East, we already have an FTA with ASEAN. We have an FTA with Japan. We have an FTA with Korea. And I think these need to be improved and reviewed so that the terms of trade are better for India. This is something I think we're already doing with ASEAN, and I hope we can do it with Japan, Korea as well. I would argue that now that this is something I say without knowing too much. As you know, I don't have any great intelligence vis-a-vis what the government thinking is. It seems to me the RCEP ship has sailed. I don't see us going back. If that is true, then I think a bilateral free trade agreement with Australia wouldn't be a bad idea. This is something on which both sides have talked a lot. And since we are having a lot to do with Australia, in the context of Quad, you might as well try to strengthen the relationship. So this is going to be one key aspect in the future, where you have excellent strategic partnerships with countries. You will try and see whether you can also do business with them. Now, this wasn't necessarily the case earlier. The typical example being ASEAN, which had excellent ties with China in trade, commerce, investment, and enjoyed the nuclear security umbrella of the United States. I don't know whether this model will be sustainable for too long. ASEAN would love to have this model continue endlessly, but I'm not sure this model will last. If we do see decoupling, and if we do see a trade war of kind, I think ASEAN will be forced to choose. Now, coming back to India, therefore, I think a bilateral free trade agreement with Australia, I would push for some kind of economic strengthening with Taiwan, frankly. This is something we haven't done enough. And it's strange. Countries which have been much closer to China, like Singapore, have better ties with Taiwan than India. It defies common sense. Why are we so cagey? When Singapore can do it, and Singapore has vastly better relations with China than India does as of today. So what have we got to lose? We are obviously not having great political relations, but what really prevents us from strengthening relations, especially in high tech, especially in areas of 5G, especially in areas of the fourth industrial revolution? This is something we should push. To the west of India, it is my, and this is something I've been saying for a long time, Manishji, you know, I've said this on your forum a couple of times earlier as well. I think a little bit we blew it by not concluding a deal with EU. We were not very far apart, it seems to me, in doing an FTA with EU, but what is gone is gone. I think you need to pick up the threads and try to do an FTA with EU as quickly as possible. Your main export markets still are European Union and United States. They are not China, they're not ASEAN. And I suspect now I can say it, they will never be China, they will never be ASEAN. Your primary markets are going to be US, EU, and Africa, because that is where at least I see potential for Indian exports. So I would try and do an FTA with EU. With the United States, an FTA maybe in the medium term, but I think we shouldn't be dragging our feet on a trade deal. In particular, at least with the United States, we should get some confirmation from them that they treat us as a developing country. It worries the hell out of me that they are bracketing China and India in the same breath. And this is a country with which we have a hugely consequential strategic relationship today. So if we can't convince United States to treat us as a developing country in the WTO for fisheries subsidies negotiations and other negotiations, then I think we will really have a problem vis-a-vis Europe and other countries. So that is something that we need to focus on immediately. I would immediately ask for talks with Africa. Africa has now become a free trade union or a free trading arrangement. Whichever way you look at it, the population of Africa is going to double from approximately 1 billion to 2 billion. I mean, the only question is when this is going to happen. Some people say 2035, other people say 2040. So sheer numbers should attract you for a potential market in Africa. China, I know, has done a lot of things in Africa, but I do see an opportunity there now for India, which we must exploit. So what then can we do in a fragmented trading system? What are the areas, and this is going to be my concluding segment, if you like, what can India do? I think in the area of healthcare, and in particular vaccines and pharmaceutical products, India has the potential to become a net public health security provider, if not for the world, at least for the region. I mean, everybody knows in 9 out of 10 vaccines for COVID, there is an India connection. So that's good. But I think in the area of pharmaceutical generic products, and we also send field hospitals to Africa. So this is an area where I think India can do much more. In the area of resilient supply chains, India should get its foot in the door. I think this is happening, and we should really do everything possible to get in on this, because we missed the last time around when the global value chains were established. We shouldn't miss the bus again. The Japanese initiative to move firms away from China, I don't know how much we are able to attract. Maybe Mr. Dilip Chenoy can tell us. I hope we are successful in getting at least some of the investment from the companies which are leaving China. I keep hearing Vietnam is a more attractive destination than India, maybe, but I still can't believe that the market, the potential for India doesn't trump the small market of Vietnam. It doesn't make sense to me why. I agree that Vietnam must be offering lesser tax rates and maybe easier, land and power and the rest of it, infrastructure. But I still can't understand why India cannot match Vietnam. We should do everything to really match Vietnam if we can. Lastly, I think Aatmanirbharta, to my mind, also should mean that in areas which are important to India, it's about time we are a rule shaper rather than a rule taker, frankly. I mean, take e-commerce. It is time we had a comprehensive dialogue with the European Union. With the United States, we have differences. It's understandable. They want a completely free flow of data with no interruption at all. But with the EU, I find our privacy law can be aligned with EU. We should talk further with EU to make rules in e-commerce, because otherwise I fear that in the subject that is going to be determinant in the fourth industrial revolution, we are not participating in the plurilateral negotiations in WTO. We are not part of any big FTA, which has e-commerce as an area of negotiation. So where are we? And this is a subject that should be of critical importance for India. So on e-commerce, I would advocate taking measures so that we can really pursue interests with EU. I would also say this of 5G, where again, I think without much time being wasted, we should tie up. Some developments have happened, but I think more needs to happen on that front as well. And lastly, on energy, I was delighted to hear that we will meet the Paris, the intended nationally determined contribution of 40% to non-fossil and renewable energy. I am told we've already met 33% of it, and that we will go on to meet 40%. this is if you actually do www climate tracker, they give India a much better score than China or the United States. And I'm not saying we should compare ourselves with them. The fact that we are doing so well, and the fact that Xi Jinping has used the UN forum to say that China will peak in 2030 and that China will have a carbon neutral economy in 2060 is frankly no big deal for me, because in my view, there is a lot of evidence that China has already peaked. So for China to say we will peak in 2030 is nonsense. By now they should have peaked, given the kind of coal-fired plants they have, and given the kind of emissions, it's about 3-4 times that of India, they should have peaked by now. So I think we can also do something in energy with the EU. I think EU can become a critical partner for India in Aatmanirbharta, especially in e-commerce and green economy. These are two areas in which the European Union possesses unbelievable strength. And this is a time when there is evidence of some tension between EU and China that we should, I think, make a move and try to give some comfort to EU, because we've also, not been entirely forthcoming in the past. So I would say, I will conclude by saying that there are different pieces of the puzzle when you talk of Aatmanirbharta, and I think they all have to come together. So it's a bit of local, it's a bit of global as well. But at the end of the day, it seems to me, as I'll go back to what I said, which is 60% of GDP is going to be, a lot of it is going to be consumption driven. A lot of it is going to be government stimulus. A lot of it is going to be investment. There is no getting away from these three things. So we should be doing everything we can in our power to get the different pieces of the matrix right in order for Aatmanirbharta to succeed. So once again, thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador Kumar. I think that was a fantastic, a very comprehensive overview of what exactly, and you beautifully started out that it's very important to know what exactly Aatmanirbhar Bharat is and what it is not. Very important point that it is definitely in Indian understanding, it is outward going and offensive. Again, very important that we should really not be losing sight of that $5 trillion goal. I think that is what should be driving India's economic policy. Again, very important, if you're looking at the broader geo-economic scenario, I think you made very important analysis in terms of the trends, that it is going to be reciprocal, it is going to be preferential, and it is going to be non-MFN driven. I think these are very important points which many should understand, and accordingly then respond and come out with, tailor the Aatmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan in that direction, knowing that larger strategic picture, keeping that in mind. And obviously, I also teach diplomacy, so very much that India needs to now actively move from a rule taker to a rule shaper, and how India can really, obviously now you see that India is going to become the non-permanent member from next year. So I think India does have in some way an institutional capacity to build on these ideas. So I think that was fantastic. I just wanted to let you all know that we are also live tweeting today's session. So please feel free to also share our program, a session on your own social media handles. We now move to our next speaker. Harshpant unfortunately has a bad stomach, and so couldn't join us today. So he has sent his apologies. So we move to a next speaker, Dr. Shamika Ravi. It's fantastic to have you with us, Shamika. She's a non-resident senior fellow of the Governance Studies program at the Brookings Institution. She was the former director of research at Brookings India and led the development economics vertical, where the focus was on financial inclusion, health, gender inequality, and urbanization. Shamika is a visiting professor of economics at the Indian School of Business, where she teaches courses in game theory and microfinance. She was very importantly a member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India, also affiliated to Financial Access Initiative of New York University. She has obviously published extensively in peer-reviewed journals and writes regular opinion pieces in major newspapers, which we all follow religiously. Her research work has been featured and cited by BBC, Guardian, Financial Times, and obviously most national and regional newspapers and magazines in India. And we all see her now, and we all know her now in a new avatar as a leading analyst using data, using charts, tracking COVID in India and its policy implications and challenges. So it's great to have you, Shamika, with us. Over to you, Shamika.
Thank you. Thank you, Manish. Namaskar. Good morning, everyone. It's so nice to be here virtually, but always good to be connected. I'd like to start by first saying that, you know, this entire move towards Aatmanirbhar Bharat, well, first of all, as Mohan very aptly, and I'm glad you started with that, but I think it needs a constant reinforcement. This is a space that has to be constantly claimed. It is not autarky. It does not mean looking inwards. It definitely does not mean a closed economy. And most importantly, it does not mean state-run, state-owned economy. So I think that let's set those basic rules, those facts and expectations in terms of why we are trying to move towards this specific strategy. One thing to recognize is that much unlike the larger fear amongst, let's say, the economics community, the trade community, that India is turning protectionist, we are beginning to look inwards, etc. One important aspect, it's not a new idea, right? Countries like the US, Germany, South Korea, and China, more recently, each of these countries have followed policies which have fundamentally given local industries a competitive edge through active policy interventions. But eventually, all these policy interventions were geared towards a common objective, which is strengthening from a global competitiveness. The local industry has to become globally competitive. There's no other way. Now, in India, we are all young enough to remember, because it isn't all that long back, that you know what a closed economy can do. It means decades of lost opportunities for human resources, which means very bright Indians either have to go abroad or have to, use very, very limited means to really prosper. We have seen that you are going to have very mass number of people living in abject poverty, massive poverty reduction, huge improvements in education, health outcomes, etc. We've had almost a structural break in the last 30 years since we started to have economic development and growth at the level and speed that we did not have in the first 45 years. So one thing to remember is we are not talking about going back to those policies, right? But that also means Aatmanirbhar Bharat has to very clearly, and we have to repeatedly say this, it has to be about greater global competitiveness. We have to make our industry globally competitive, and which means the most efficient and the most talented have to be promoted, not the best connected. I think that we need to constantly reiterate that point, because there is always a fear of slipping, right? Now, remember the per capita income we are at. We are still a low middle income country. We still have a sizable population which is in absolute poverty. We still have very many development goals, not from prosperity just in terms of a GDP, but we have very many real obligations to ourselves. So we cannot afford not to grow, which means Aatmanirbhar Bharat has to very closely, and I think that strategy and that overall objective has to be guarded away from any kind of a capture, which means efficiency has to be promoted. We really have to now support this vision by active policy making, which really does promote talent and efficiency within the Indian economy. Right? Now, I'd like to first start off by mentioning that two sectors in particular, because we are in the midst of a pandemic and we can't speak of economy and growth in an sort of an abstract sense or a theoretical sense. One thing to remember is our investment into healthcare sector. We have known this, it is almost like common knowledge now, that we have invested, we have underinvestment in health and education. In fact, we remain the only major economy that has witnessed exponential growth or years of exponential growth without having made a requisite investment in health and education. There is no getting away from that. It will always remain a monkey on our back. We will have to make those investments into health and education. And that is really the groundwork or sort of the cornerstone for future sustainable economic growth. So we will have to make those investments. That's number one. But it is not just from the point of view of an SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals as far as health indicator and education, etc., and skills are concerned. Healthcare sector is also strategically of great importance to India. And that is because the global economy, at least the OECD nations or the prosperous part of the world, is aging. Now, no economy in the world has managed to reduce its healthcare costs, which means with an aging population in the developed part of the world, with rising costs of healthcare, India has a very natural cost advantage or a comparative advantage. The largest of that coming from our young human resource. We have been the big suppliers of doctors and nurses to the global economy, but if done right, if we can really think of healthcare sector as that engine of growth for the next 100 years, we will have to make those necessary investments, which means the IT sector, what it has done for India in the last 30 years, healthcare can do for us over the next 100 years. No country can wish away healthcare expenditure. And India, therefore, has that advantage. One is the HR because of the age composition, etc., the demographic advantage, but the other is also the IT advantage. In fact, health IT is a very large growing sector where we already have certain advantages, but it is not going to be growing on its own. It will require strategy. It will require a certain amount of maneuvering in order to capture the potential that it has. Similarly, if you look at the pharma sector, there is a reason India is called pharmacy to the world. Of course, we do have dependence because that's the nature of the global supply chain. We do depend on other countries and notably China, but last 6 months has been a great reality check for us. And in no way are we going to give away that cost advantage that we've had. So I think, again, from the larger healthcare perspective, we will have to promote this sector because it can truly be the engine of growth for India over the next many, many decades. Now, what I commonly have been hearing in India, in Delhi, for the last many years now, is that India has missed the manufacturing bus because, again, the examples that Mohan very eloquently mentioned, Vietnam, Bangladesh, and more recently, when firms are trying to relocate out of China, we are missing out. We hear that often. Now, one issue to remember is that the reason a false narrative, which is the missing the manufacturing bus, is because manufacturing demand is not just, again, coming from OECD part of the world. The future of this large manufacturing will come from Africa, Latin America, and the rest of Asia. Asia is not just Eastern Asia or the affluent part that we talk about. There is a very large part of global population where income levels are rising, therefore demand for basic manufacturing, apparels, leather, woodwork, furniture, little things, those demands are only going to rise. Now, with the kind of cost disadvantages that China has vis-a-vis labor costs now, not just because of the one-child policy they've had for many years, which distorted the demographics, though in the short run it seemed to, we were greatly we would look upon that and wish that we had similar containment strategies to manage our population. But in the long run, you do know that those cost advantages are gone. So if we are to now move this large global supply chain away from China towards us, it is not just going to come, right? Firms are always looking for attractive venues, and that is where I think the ease of doing business and the great push that we have seen, not just from the central government, but also from the local state governments. Large part of economic growth policies are really state subjects. And that is where this great push that is required is very much necessary right now. But, if you just look at the India-China, the trade, the nature of our trade, then you'll be surprised that, and Mohan's example of the shirts and, zippers, waiting for zippers, such, the dependence because of the cost advantages have become so distorted and so skewed that weaning away will take, some costs. But the good thing is, I think the Indian population, by and large, is ready for that. Right? I mean, by and large, what we have realized in the last 6 months, given not just actions of China, but I think largely we do realize that we have to become more resilient and self-dependent. But dependence, for instance, a large part of our umbrellas come from China, furnitures. Now, these are not high technology. So we're not talking about great investments in R&D that are required for us to capture that global demand or even domestic demand for these things. But it will require, I think, beyond the government, also industry organizations and associations. And that's where I think FICCI and the CIIs, etc. I think industry organizations have a very large role to play in terms of maneuvering and sort of channeling, these potentials. Now, the third sector I wanted to talk about is the IT sector. Now, this will also come as a question, which we have to sort of contemplate about, is that, just about 10 years back, when the 2008 Olympics happened, many of us who visited China, or we were speaking to friends there, they would speak in great awe of the Bangalore model. Oh, how well India has done, and look, it's a global IT hub, and look how well Bangalore is doing. And yet, within 10 years, the next phase of IT revolution, which is AI, they are leaps and bounds ahead of us. Now, the question we have to ask is, how is it that while we had such tremendous advantages in the IT space, we have not managed to channel that towards, the AI space the way China has? Which will mean that we have to not just have a longer vision as far as economic policy making is concerned, but I think a large part of that responsibility also sits on industry. Government is a large part of the economy as far as shaping the vision and strategy is concerned, but industry must also look ahead and invest in the future. And that is again where associations like FICCI and CII, etc., have a very, very big role to play. That I think it's important for industry to also be ambitious for the country from a long-term perspective and make those investments into R&D, which are, there's no shortcut around it. That entire movement from IT towards AI will require R&D investments. Now, a large part of, I think, as far as the bilateral investment treaties or trade negotiations are concerned, or when I hear something like we should become rule shapers, not rule takers, I think what holds us back is, in a large part, our lack of knowledge. I think it is not just the capacity within the government, which means, again, the kind of investment we are making into R&D, where a lot of negotiations, a lot of decision-making still is within the purview of theory. We need measurements. If you have to get the price right, which is what a lot of negotiations are about, we have to have very accurate knowledge of exactly what is the composition of the particular sectors that we are trying to negotiate on. We have to have very good information on what are the costs and the benefits. So not just from a normative sense, but a really good detailed assessment and largely data driven. And I think that investment is why I think, the think tanks and within the ministries, why we need to strengthen more research, which can go into active day-to-day policy making. But again, that is also beyond the government. That kind of investment has to be made by industry bodies as well. Because this is the problem of the commons. You will not see individual firms can't be investing this kind of R&D because it's for the good of all. And therefore, again, industry associations have to make those investments into measurements and assessment and lay of the land and what are the exact benefits that we are truly struggling for when we sit at the negotiating table, vis-a-vis larger multilateral institutions or in terms of the bilateral investment treaties vis-a-vis specific countries. Now, I think the rule of the game has already changed because what we have seen, not just vis-a-vis China, but whether the kind of currency manipulation, the kind of the technology transfer, and the kind of capitalism with Chinese characteristics, which has given them that advantage. I don't think, being a liberal democracy, we are not in a position to emulate those. We are still very much rule bound and democratic in our ways. And in fact, if you've been following the COVID pandemic, then it is surprising that we, while China sits in the middle of this conversation, we know nothing about the actual number of deaths or the actual number of cases, or what is the contact tracing efforts. We have anecdotal evidence, we have certain amounts of sporadic information coming out from their containment strategies, etc. But it's remarkable. And this is sort of a reality check for also how large, global leadership in terms of multilateral arrangements. Look at the role of the WHO. And many developing countries, including us, we are looking at the WHO for this kind of leadership. But it's been all countries for yourself. Each of us, and particularly large federal democracies, are having to fend, and against a mass hysteria against the US, Brazil, and India. Being constantly compared to China is almost is very amusing, given that the kind of transparency in terms of data sharing, the fact that you have very large federal democracies, which means many administrations and state governments which are making a lot of the decisions. And because of that democratic structure, I think, of course, we have a much greater data transparency and knowledge of what the pandemic looks like in each of these countries. And therefore, a sort of a tumultuous path compared to China. And we have to take that same lesson to the larger negotiations when we do vis-a-vis China. It's similar lack of information and knowledge, which is, in terms of many of our, other economic negotiations and understanding of how China has managed. But I think, given that the largest number of cases in the WTO that have come up are against China, large number of them have been settled, but many, many cases are still open, shows that, I think there is a larger global sort of a movement away from the old economic model, which has benefited China to a great deal. And I think because of that, Aatmanirbharta remains sort of the best response from a game theoretic sense. It's the best response for any large country, and particularly for one in the neighborhood of China. So I think Aatmanirbharta is the need of the time, but at the same time, we cannot let it take us back to the first 50 years of India's economic growth. We have to treat this as a sort of a trampoline or to go on to a new sort of phase of economic growth, one that is shaped by global competitiveness and investments in research and development across different sectors of the economy. So I'll stop with that. I'll be happy to take questions.
Yeah, thanks, Shamika. I think I'm so glad that there's a consensus of sorts that Aatmanirbhar Bharat definitely is not going back to pre-1991 license permit Raj. And what is so important is that the Indian companies have to be globally competitive. I think that's a no one should be, especially sitting in FICCI. This is what we should be encouraging. And again, very important that what need to be focusing more on health and education sectors. Obviously, this whole, not exactly a fascination, but Indian ambition to be a rule shaper rather than a rule taker. I think it's very important that one realizes that, as you rightly pointed out, that really calls for more data-driven sort of studies and putting more money for research. I think that those are, very important points which you have talked about today. With this, I think we can conclude this panel. And since we are running late, we'll try to get questions maybe at the fag end of the second panel, provided we have that time. So can we now move to the industry panel, and we have with us Mr. Manoj Chugas with us, I guess.
He's joined. He's joined. Both Amit and
Hi, Manish. How are you?
Yeah, great,
Manish,
sir.
good to see you.
Yeah, thanks. Great to see you, sir. And it's fantastic that we have Sri Manoj Chugh with us. He is the president of Group Public Affairs, Mahindra and Mahindra Limited since 2019. Was president business development and enterprise business, again Tech Mahindra, and global head of business development Mahindra Satyam. Very importantly, alumni of the very prestigious IIT Kharagpur. So it's great to have you, Chugh Saab, with us. I have been seeing some of your earlier videos, and earlier I'm following you also. So you have really, set a benchmark of sorts for many from your own industry in terms of international operations, in terms of successfully leading Indian businesses abroad. So without further ado, I hand it over to Manoj Chugh, sir. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Manish, and a great honor and pleasure for me to be with all of you this morning. I come from a technology background, and I couldn't resist when Shamika started talking about artificial intelligence and how India kind of has almost lagged, if you will, versus some other countries and some other parts of the world. So sorry if I begin my Aatmanirbhar journey talking about artificial intelligence and the relevance. I just want to take everyone back, to the pre-2000 era. Many of you would remember, and many of us who are old enough know, that when we were going through school and college, I think it used to be a dream of almost everyone to find a way of going to the US to do a master's or to do something else, because everyone felt that there wasn't enough opportunity in India. And therefore, the best thing is from a career perspective to really go out. And there were lots of articles written about the brain drain and so on and so forth. And I can only tell you that I've worked on both sides. I worked with many high-tech US firms, bringing them to India, showing them the opportunity that our domestic market has, and then also encouraging them to leverage the talent. And my view was very simple. If so many of our engineers are doing fine work outside India, why can't they do fine work in India? And that has been almost a very important and major motivation for me. And my pitch used to be very simple, a pitch of what Ambassador Mohan also spoke about. We have a large domestic market, come to India. There's huge opportunity to do business here. And there's also an opportunity for you to increase and improve your earnings per share, because guess what? When you come to India and you do technology related work in India, your cost of delivery of the product comes down. So you work both sides of the equation. You work the earnings side and you work the cost side if you come to India. And that is why we are so unique. And I think this really played out well for us. And today we have hundreds of high-tech firms which have set up many, many development centers in India. You see them all over. I don't have to talk about the names. They are Fortune 500 companies, just not from the high-tech sector now, but cutting across sectors. So my message is very simple, that people came to India because they believed in a story. And not only did they believe in the story delivered on its promise. So India eventually, it took time, delivered on the promise of being a resilient domestic market. And I think our engineers went on to prove that they could deliver world-class technology, products, software, and so on at very competitive cost points. So we were able to do both. We were able to show a resilient market, a market based on rules, a very fair market on one hand, and on the other hand, we were able to show the prowess of our engineers. Now, why did people come to India? And that's where the story of Aatmanirbhar is going to play out. People came to India because of cost. Let's not kid ourselves. They knew that you could get an Indian engineer, a fantastic engineer, for a fraction of the cost that you could get the same engineer in the US. So one classmate goes to the US, you need to pay him $120,000, $130,000. The same guys in India, you get the person at a third to a fifth of the cost. So cost arbitrage, very clear. But the reason why they stayed, because remember, this story has been playing out for many decades now. The reason why people stayed in India was not just cost, it was quality. Because our engineers consistently delivered on time, every time, whatever they promised. So they came for cost, they stayed for quality. And the reason why the world will come to India going forward in the future is because of innovation. And I think a lot of people will turn around and say, Manoj, you don't know what you're smoking. I can tell you decades ago, when we got so many tech firms into India, everyone said the same thing. Why would they come to India? The best brains from India are going to their country. Pray, what logic are you trying to apply? And I'm saying that emphatically today, that the world will come to India because they will believe that India is the right place where they can get patents, where they can get innovation, where they can make sure that their future products by which they serve their customers can be done out of India end to end. And I think that as more and more organizations start believing this story and our ability to deliver on our digital prowess, we will see India becoming Aatmanirbhar in a very new and innovative way going forward in the future. I want to take the example of artificial intelligence because I think it's a very, very good point that has been made. AI is going to be the bedrock of change across many industries going forward in the future. You need two key things for AI. Number one, you need an algorithm. To write an algorithm, you need strong mathematical skills. I think nobody has a doubt on our mathematical skills. We have proven it many times. So let's take that as granted. But the second thing that you need is, you need tons of data to feed into the algorithm so that you can train the algorithm to either make a prediction or help you make a choice. And it could be in any area. It could be healthcare, it could be manufacturing, could be retail, could be so on and so forth. You choose any vertical, any area. That's essentially what AI helps you. It's an algorithm. You train that with a lot of data, and then you teach that algorithm to make a decision for you. Now, access to data in a democracy like India, has lots of connotations. So if I were to make a request to everyone who's watching this event today to please share all of their private data with me, to share all of their digital footprint with me, so that I could take all of your data to train my algorithm. How many of you are going to do it? Nobody. There are countries in the world where this is a non-issue. So we must accept the fact that when you are in a rule-based economy, you are in a democracy, access to data has to follow certain norms. So I think it's a matter of time because the government is putting a lot of new frameworks in place. As access to data becomes easier, our ability to train the algorithm will become much better. And therefore, our ability to innovate will also improve in this specific area. So I am an optimist. I must put my disclaimer up front. So I would say that it's only a matter of time when India would start leading in the area of artificial intelligence across a number of use cases. And there's lots of information which we as folks from IT, the industry that I've come from, have, but we can't share in the public domain. But I think I'd like to give all of you tremendous confidence that our engineers are fantastic. They understand this stuff very well. It's only a matter of time. Yes, there are countries, which have moved ahead and done well. Now, let me come back to Aatmanirbharta, and I think we're all in violent agreement that Aatmanirbharta is not just about self-reliance, but also about our ability to lead the world. You can lead the world if you lead in India. And I think we are blessed and fortunate to have several examples that we can go back and. The first example that I would really like to talk about is the example of an industry which I have some idea about, which is in the area of farm equipment or tractors. Today, as many of you might know, India is the largest producer of tractors in the world as a country. So India is #1 by volume in terms of tractor manufacture in the world. We've been talking about manufacturing, India is kind of lagged, lots of stories around it, but there are good stories as well. How did that happen? Because step one in that journey was for India to start designing, producing, manufacturing tractors. The Green Revolution provided that opportunity. Now you could turn around and say, well, there was a forcing function there, but then we all know necessity is the mother of invention. So I think we got that opportunity, to kind of create for the domestic market and then lead the world. So I think that's a fine example that we can look to. I just want to very quickly add a few more words, and then I'm going to hand this back to Manish, is in terms of what is the opportunity that we see going forward in the future. Clearly, as the ambassador also shared, a lot of our FTAs are eastbound rather than westbound. But the fact is we really need to look at our FTAs to be more equitable to supporting Indian industry. I think we have been open-hearted in terms of the FTAs that have been signed. I know the government has serious intent of renegotiating many of them so that they are more equitable. I think once we have equitability in terms of whichever FTAs we have signed, that will open up opportunities for us. Market access is critical. Many of our products, unfortunately, are levied significantly higher tariffs as compared to the same products coming in from other countries. And we need to set these anomalies right. I think our decisions at a point in time were right, but then over a period of time, if you don't keep innovating, if you don't keep discussing, negotiating, issues and challenges do come about. I also see a tremendous opportunity for us as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned. I certainly, I'm very delighted to see how our relationships with Sri Lanka, how our relationships with Bangladesh, Maldives, several other countries, how they've kind of changed and improved over a period of time. I have absolute confidence that our neighborhood will continue to provide huge opportunities for us, and our government will take the right steps to make sure that our neighbors feel happy and secure, within India, amidst their own neighborhood. So I think our neighborhood first policy, the outreach the government is doing, including a very important G2G meeting that's happening today, I think all bodes well for us. There are opportunities, as many of us have said, in the Asian region, whether it's Indonesia, whether it's going right out to Australia, Japan, all of them are important locations, destinations for us, and certainly Indian companies are already doing a good job. There is an opportunity for us to do a lot more. I am optimistic about the opportunity in Africa. I think several of our friends have spoken about that. I think if we double down, that's going to yield good results for us. So all I'd like to say is market access is important. Our colleagues have already spoken about different geographies. Absolutely, we need to leverage our defense ties and make sure that we have a more wholesome relationship, a more 360-degree relationship, if I would add. And last but not least of all, I'd like to comment and say that India's soft power cannot be forgotten, and we must leverage our soft power. I think we do it to some degree, but I think there's an opportunity for us to do a lot more, whether it's our art, whether it's our culture, whether it is people of Indian descent or Indian origin, whether it's our cinema. There is tremendous elements that we can put together in terms of our soft power, leverage that to build stronger relationships, to build better bilateral ties with countries where market access is going to give us significant leverage and advantage, and at the same time be very open-hearted about the opportunity that India as a domestic market offers to those countries as well. So Manish, these are my opening comments. Thank you very much. So I remain optimistic, leverage technology, continue to do what you're doing well, make sure that we are able to improve and increase market access, leverage our soft power. We will be Aatmanirbhar, self-reliant, and valuable to the world.
Manish, you're on mute. Yeah.
Yeah, great, sir. I think this is I think a very optimistic picture coming from the industry. I think that's such a very, it's so heartening to hear that. And especially there is so much, you get to read or at least hear so much that, India really seems to have lost the manufacturing bus. We really cannot be globally competitive in that sense. So I think Chuk Saab really made it categorically clear that the India story, in fact, has been a story of success internationally. Obviously, it is really about cost. It is about quality of people, the quality of human resource that is going to bring in investors, that is going to bring in businesses to Indian shores. I think that's a very important point. And again, a very genuine expectation from the government regarding the FTAs, that at some level India at least seems to have been much more generous in FTAs. But I think the RCEP story makes it very clear that the industry interest will be taken on board. I think that's a fantastic, obviously, point which you have raised, issue which you have raised. Obviously, leveraging our technology, leveraging our defense ties, strategic partnerships to really promote Indian businesses. And again, soft power. We talk about so much about soft power, but I think at some we should start leveraging it to really promote our ideas, to promote our interest, and they can include, most importantly, economic interests too. Fantastic, sir. With this, I now request my friend Amit, who is in fact very much, he's one prime example. Sorry, he's one prime example of a dramatic kind of a real successful shift from the world of academia to right into the corporate world. Amit Singh is the general manager and the group head of and corporate affairs of the Asian Paints. Great to have Amit. We have been having these conversations. In fact, he was the one who goaded me into doing this symposium. That, Manish, there's so much talk about this. Why don't you, look at and bring in exactly a combination of academia, the world of diplomacy, which I operate in, and again look at really what how does the corporate world think about this whole Aatmanirbhar Bharat. So thanks to Amit, we are doing this. With this, now I call Amit for his address. Over to you, Amit.
Thank you so much, Manish. It is indeed a pleasure and honor, and thank you for accepting my suggestion. So I'll start with exactly what you pointed out. Am I audible?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. So I think the concept of Aatmanirbhar Bharat rests on 5 pillars: Samriddhi, Samman, Sahyog, Samvad, and Shanti. I think in this light, and we are fundamental believers in this. It's not just me who feel attached to this wording, but I think it's coming from the leadership as well. In this spirit, I think this discussion with the academia bringing in a perspective of a diplomat, a data-driven scientist, and from the industry, I think reflects very well in the scheme of things. So coming to the concept of Aatmanirbhar Bharat, I think it would require an overhauling of the entire system. One is the cultural aspect, or the way we exist as a nation, whether it is socio-political, economic milieu. I think we have come away from, let's say, if we have seen how things have transformed in the last 2 decades. We have gained phenomenally. We have, I think I would say, leapfrogging from where we were. But I think now that in the new geo-economic order, we really need to pull up our socks and be ready to lead the world. I think that was very well pointed out by my previous speakers. I'll rather corroborate each and every point which they mentioned, whether it be from the HR point of view, whether from the sectoral knowledge point of view, whether from our geostrategic ties point of view, FTAs. It has to reflect in each and every segment of the society and governance. Now, coming to how industry view the Aatmanirbhar Bharat as, I think every sector has certain nuances. I come from a sector which is a very big success story. 99% of the paint industry is indigenous. We produce 99% of the products produced are produced in India, manufactured in India. Now, what is in there for us in Aatmanirbhar Bharat? It is very phenomenal. So one is what we manufacture here, where we are in the value chain. Having said that, 99% of it is manufactured in India, but the reliance overseas on raw materials, it's a raw material intensive industry, is phenomenal. I'll just give you an example and then I'll come to Aatmanirbhar Bharat, what we need to think about. There's one raw material, rutile, TiO2. It's abundantly available in India, in Kerala, in Orissa. For the last 20 years, the Indian capacity is 40,000 metric tons. Paint industry alone needs 3 lakh metric tons. The capacity, for whatever reason, I'm not going into it, hasn't been enhanced. So we really need to look at such examples, and there may be such examples in each and every sector. Why do we need to import if there are sufficient abundant resources available in India? So we really need to think about these, whether it is, I think Shamika very well pointed out whether the decision making is supported by the relevant knowledge, facts and figures. And if the facts and figures are right, then it requires an accountability on all of us, whether the policymakers, on the industry, on the civil society, and we as a nation, all the people. So I think it's how do we view Aatmanirbhar Bharat is we have to look at it in a holistic sense. We have to understand the value chains, supply chains, where it is coming from, how sustainable it is. We cannot manufacture everything in India. But yes, we should be self-reliant. And self-reliance both externally as also internal. I'll touch upon both the things. So internal, one example I gave this, which is rutile, and it can be replicated in many other dimensions. Let's say in medical devices, I was earlier a part of a multinational corporation. We were looking at setting up a big manufacturing hub in India, and I was a part of a global team which evaluated 12 countries across continents. I was pushing India as a big market for 2 years, and I did not see any success in that. Then I tried to do the reverse engineering myself. I think, what is it that would click? And what clicked in that case was, and I think that was also pointed out very clearly by my previous speakers, the cost-effective manufacturing, the cost-competitive manufacturing, the availability of the relevant HR sustainably. Let's say in Mexico, there were 15 plants there. They have exhausted and the human resource is no more available. Here in that particular segment, biomedical engineers and IT innovations, we have so much of capacities here which are relevant to biomedical appliances that for the next 50 years we can provide that. So those were the aspects. So every sector has a nuance that need to be understood as to what is it, what would work to bring in that Aatmanirbharta. Now going overseas, as a company, Asian Paints, which I represent, we have, yeah. Sorry, there was a echo. That's why I thought like, there was a observation.
So just go ahead. Someone's got the mic on. Just go ahead.
Yeah. So we, as a company, have 17 manufacturing units outside India, right? From Ethiopia, Egypt, Oman, Bahrain, UAE, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Oceania. So we have 17 manufacturing units outside. How can we bring in Aatmanirbharta there? And I think rightly pointed out by Manoj, market access is one fundamental thing. We have so many bilateral arrangements, whether it is FTAs, or whether we have a certain social endeavors. How can we leverage, Indian companies leverage those? Are the missions abroad having an accountability of promoting the Indian industry in those geographies? I was pleasantly surprised to see, I was just reading yesterday on LinkedIn, one of the US commercial service officer landed in Tanzania, and his message was, I'm here to promote the interest of my industry. I think even our diplomatic service should think about such endeavors. They are thinking, but in their own way. I think there needs to be much more cohesive samvad, I would say, that needs to get into their mindsets. Our overseas missions, our bilateral ties, they need to bring in samriddhi for the indigenous industry, because unless and until we are strong enough in our international advocacy, how would the indigenous industry survive? There are market access issues, which I think are very much well known. Then how are we branding India across the nations? Is just a market a big thing for us? No, we have to actually, I think that was also pointed out by my earlier speakers, is that it's a cost-effective manufacturing location with abundant availability of technical force, of human resource. These are the factors which would bring us into the supply chain. In some sectors, market may not be, while sustainably there would be a big market. Let's say in medical devices, I'll give that example. The big investment was focused at going outside, and just 3% of it could have been met by Indian consumption. 97% of it was supposed to go outside. These are the models which we need to think, and nuanced sectors, the sector nuances should be very well understood. A blanket approach, I think we all need to work towards that. I'm not here to point out the deficiencies, but I think there need to be greater samvad and trust between, it's all, accountability rests on us. Now, and I think Shamika also referred to the ease of doing business. While the intent, there's a lot of, I would say there's a significant shift in ease of doing business in the last 1 decade. I myself have witnessed that. But are we there yet? It needs to trickle down. I've seen a big, I think big and a phenomenal transformation at the policy level, at the higher levels. When it trickles down at the factory level, and I myself have run factories, are we really there yet? No. Even at the state level, where the policy interfaces are required in terms of ease of doing, there are some examples, very big examples. Telangana, you see, there is a clear accountability on a decision maker that within 15 days, if you do not give this clearance, there would be a salary deduction. So these are the kind of accountabilities that need to be built in. Perhaps in the ecosystem, and equally, I think the equal responsibility lies on the industry as well. So I think these are the nuances. I would say, how do we ensure a transparent and technology-driven ecosystem, whether it is manufacturing, whether it is services, whether I think so. The industry is looking forward for that and to contribute towards that. And only then I think this aim of Aatmanirbhar Bharat would be realized in real sense. With a few words, I'll rest. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Amit, for that wonderful elaboration of what exactly Aatmanirbhar Bharat. Again, you talked about 5 pillars, holistic sense, and obviously industry expectations from the government, that you talk about this whole talk about ease of doing business, but to what extent can really government enable or create a supportive ecosystem internationally? I think these are very valid points. Again, we move now to the next and the concluding part of the valedictory session. And I'm extremely honored that we have with us Sri Suresh Prabhu, one of India's finest policy minds, a thinking politician and a parliamentarian. I mean, he, in fact, a 6-time member of parliament, 4 Lok Sabha, 2 Rajya Sabha, held 10 very powerful cabinet positions in the government of India, and extremely proud that he is from my state of Maharashtra. I've known him for over a decade now, and I've been interacted earlier too. He has been extremely kind and generous, and has joined many of our other programs. And I'm especially delighted and again truly privileged to have with us. So without further ado, we are looking forward excitedly to hearing Prabhu Saab. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Manish, and thank you very much for this very interesting and very enlightening program. And I'm very happy that the previous speakers have highlighted many dimensions of this very important mission that India has embarked upon. That's Aatmanirbhar Bharat. I was, if I'm not mistaken, I think because I didn't get time to go through it properly, but I think what Manish was mentioning was the geopolitics and Aatmanirbhar. That is what you mentioned in your program.
So this is Aatmanirbhar Bharat in a changing geo-economic order.
Okay. So I think in that context, let us look at one, as my previous speaker just highlighted, there are a lot of issues that we need to deal with domestically. But let us, because you mentioned that as one of the important, and that's the title of your program, let me briefly deal with that aspect. See, the world is changing like never before. We have passed through various phases in geoeconomics of the world, but particularly what we are seeing now is a completely different kind of world that is emerging. After the war, Second World War, the US on one side and USSR on the other, they took upon themselves the responsibility to restoring the economies of the war-affected countries in their respective domain. They had already divided the world into two parts. So that brought about a tremendous amount of economic revival in different war-ravaged economies and countries, right from Far East to Japan to Europe, in Germany and many others. I would not say the economies of East Europe or Central Asia grew at the same level, but still there was a huge investment that came in. The entrepreneurship of those countries helped. As a result of that, there was a growth. Then came another phase in which, particularly after the establishment of WTO, which was a successor to GATT, we saw exponential growth into global trade. And a global trade provided the impetus that was necessary for the global economies to grow. As a result of that, not only trade grew at an incredibly high level, but also along with that, investment, cross-border investment increased dramatically from different locations into this. We had seen a phenomena in which the FDI in particular will go mainly from one developed country to another developed country. And even today we are seeing that a recipient of FDI, some of the top developed countries take up a good lion's share of that. But in this particular period of post-WTO, we saw a huge growth into FDI coming into the so-called South. That again propelled economic growth. Also, this coincided with a period in which the global supply chain emerged as another driver of growth. And the countries who benefited from it, obviously, were developing countries, whether it is in Southeast Asia or others. Southeast Asia had actually benefited from it even earlier. Japan and Korea, when they decided to outsource their manufacturing. They were the natural choices because of proximity as well as their very proactive policies. That phenomena, in a way, was challenged during 2008 crisis. And we saw a decline in global trade margins or volumes. At the same time, even the FDI slowed down. So the twin engine of growth for the world, the trade and the investments, both were not as robust as they were before. In fact, the global economy till 2008 was growing at a low pace, which was lower than the growth in the global trade. Of course, two things happened why it slowed down, also because of not only volume, but also the prices for the commodities went down. As a result of that, the value and volume both affected in global trade. Now, we are reaching a stage in which, even before the pandemic, we are seeing that countries have started looking inward and challenging this economic order in their own way, for their own benefit. Obviously, every country will try to do that for their own benefit anyway. So they challenge the whole concept of multilateralism. I'm not saying all the countries, few countries. And the entire foundation of this global growth was multilateralism. WTO is a multilateral institution that actually propelled world economy to grow faster. So this was happening anyway. The trends were very visible. And in that context, we are seeing today that post-pandemic, even countries are becoming even more inward, to an extent that we were always demanding, as developing country, along with others, similarly placed countries like us, that there should be a movement of people from one country to another. That was natural movement that we were demanding. But today, forget that. Of course, for a completely different reason. But nobody's going to go from one country to another. Of course, there is nothing as this is as a barrier, but as a safety measure for the countries to ensure that they don't get affected from the infected countries who are more infected than them. Even Europe, EU, as an entity which actually always believed in borderless unit. The Shenzhen agreement meant that you don't need passport and visas. You can just cross the border without any issue. They also put the restrictions. And this will be, I hope, temporary, and I'm sure it will be. But this again is a pointer to the fact that world is changing like they were before. And we are going to see a completely different economic policies to be pursued by countries, developed as well as developing. We strongly believe in multilateralism. In fact, I, as a commerce minister, had organized two main mini ministerials. One was in March 2018, other one was in March 2019. And they were extremely well attended. In fact, the first one in 2018 was probably the biggest ever mini minister attended by more than 57 countries. Only to drive home the point that we need multilateralism more than any other time so that we can actually bring economic growth back. So we believe in that. But as we can see clearly, the world, and particularly some countries in the world is too larger entity, but some major countries in the world are thinking differently. And that is big challenge for India to grow at a rate that we desire to grow when there are such strong headwinds coming. In fact, the headwinds were there even 2008, but they were probably look like we are entering air pocket and will come out of it. Now it looks like the entire flight chart, the cockpit is telling us it might be all the way a completely turmoil on the global skies. And that's one of the reasons that we should think differently in terms of Aatmanirbhar Bharat. I, as a commerce minister, even before the pandemic happened more than 3 years ago, had set up a group under a task force under the chairmanship of Surjit Bhalla, who is now India's executive director in the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. And which are a very high-powered group. One of the members was Dr. Jaishankar, who is presently the foreign minister of India, but at that time he was with the Tatas. And Adil Zainulbhai, former Commerce Secretary Rajiv Kher, and many others, top people. I spent huge amount of time with each one of them as a group collectively as well as individually to strategize as to what should India's navigation strategy should be through pass through this. At that time, there was no COVID, no Corona. I'm talking about even much, much before that. Because I was realizing that what we have been seeing as a trend post 2008 will become more and more profound and which can cause serious challenges to India's economic growth in future. And that report is ready. I spent a lot of time. It has a complete strategy as to how do you engage with the world in this new changing geoeconomics of the world. This was done, as I said again, more than 3 years ago. I had insisted that the report be submitted to me before the last election so that the government which appointed it will receive it, and it was processed by me. I hope we implement it. So this will actually give us a clear direction what needs to be done. And as I said, Jaishankar was a member of it. So as a foreign minister, I'm sure he would be concurring with what is a future course of action for India should be on geoeconomic sphere. I'm very sure that is Aatmanirbhar Bharat is a necessity, but has to be seen in the context of what the world is changing. And therefore, in our own national interest, we must have a proper articulated vision of how this Aatmanirbhar Bharat will help us to grow at a much higher rate than what we are seeing today. Of course, today we are in a completely different territory in terms of growth, which is negative. But when we stabilize after a few quarters, we'll have to make sure that we have a strategy to grow at a much faster rate. And there, we'll have to find out engines of growth. The infrastructure inevitably has to be one of them. And that's a hard physical infrastructure. So along with that, we have to ensure that economic decision making can be far more proactive so that entrepreneurship of India can grow faster, to create jobs, to add more economic output, but also bring more dynamism into India's economy. We need to diversify India's economy. I had prepared a plan for $5 trillion economy as a commerce industry minister, which I'm sure is now, of course, we cannot reach $5 trillion when our rate of growth has come down. But we'll definitely reach there, but it will be, obviously, will take more years than what we thought earlier. But in that diversification basket, we're thinking about taking India's manufacturing from 16% to 20% of the GDP, or other industry from 16% to 20%. Agriculture, which is today 14%, should also be taken to about 20%. When I say agriculture, it includes all allied activities. I had prepared a plan for agriculture export, first time in India. And that would also mean that all, when we say agriculture export, includes agriculture, horticulture, dairy, marine products, meat, all put together can increase dramatically. The target was $100 billion. That's all doable. We have prepared a complete action plan, so it's all possible. And all in the realm of reality that can happen in the next few years' time. Same way, we have to identify certain sectors which can grow faster than others, which can add to more GDP growth. As the aviation minister, again, we have prepared a complete roadmap, including a long-term plan for manufacturing aircrafts in India. Because we'll be needing to buy more than 2,300 aircrafts, as per the estimate of for the top aircraft manufacturers of the world, not our own estimate. Of course, that again now will be delayed a bit because the aviation industry is the worst affected as a result of corona, not only in India, globally. But those manufacturers, and as you know, in each of the aircraft, you need literally several tens of thousands of parts, components. So you start making from there and then go in for assembly over a period of time. But such new avenues have to be discovered to make sure that we add to GDP, which will have impact, positive impact on all aspects. The air cargo policy was one such initiative to ensure that our service sector will grow faster. So we have to identify such new ideas, new technologies, and particularly the emerging technologies, Internet of Things, big data, artificial intelligence, all of that put together must be integrated into each and every aspect of India's economic activity. So anyway, I had to go for some other program, and therefore I didn't want to say no to all of you, but at the same time, I hope this was your topic because I never prepare a speech. I never got time to look into that. Therefore, I thought I will ask Manish about whether it is what you wanted me to speak about. But anyway, at some other time, we'll talk a little longer on these issues. I wish you all the best. And as Prime Minister Narendra Modi has clearly identified the priority areas in which the growth will come in a way that we can ensure that livelihood opportunities also will be created. So whether it is the Startup India program or whether it is Make in India program, all of that put together can add to the economic activity, but at the same time will create jobs, because that is very important. Economics cannot be seen as isolation unless it is part of a overall social priorities of the economy and the country at any given point of time. So unless we grow also socially through adding jobs, creating employment opportunities, providing more livelihoods to more number of people, the economic activity alone cannot succeed in addressing the challenges. So I'm sure we'll work on all this together, thanks to leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. But as I said, we have to see it in the context of, and I'm happy that you kept this topic, of geoeconomics of the world, how is it changing and how we should position in that. Thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you, sir. It was a very enlightening address. I think we all learned straight how exactly the government of India is thinking under Prime Minister Modi's leadership. What is the exact thrust of the government and what sort of challenges it sees? And definitely you pointed out that it has become a necessity. And again, obviously COVID completely dramatized it, or maybe completely pushed India into adopting such policies, but it really was coming from, as you rightly pointed out, 2008 financial crisis experiences, and how in fact the government of India was much ahead in really planning and again seeing this shifting geoeconomic order and accordingly putting policies in place. And that's exactly why we see the RCEP decision before the pandemic hit, that India really took a very bold step to really exactly assessing these sorts of initiatives. So I think with this, since we have come to the end of the program, I now call upon Mrs. Bhavna Dabade to give a formal vote of thanks. Unfortunately, we have we have turned into the end of the events session, so we have to curtail or cut down our Q&A. So over to you, Bhavna, for the formal vote of thanks.
Thanks, Manish. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, please go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Thanks, Manish. Let me begin by profusely thanking Honorable Shri Suresh Prabhuji for his very enlightening, valedictory address today. Knowing his very busy schedule, it's indeed a privilege to have him with us today. I would also like to thank our esteemed panelists, Ambassador Mohit Kumar sir, Professor Shamika Ravi, Shri Manoj Chukji, and Shri Amit Singh ji for making excellent presentations. Most importantly, we would like to thank Shri Dilip Chinoy sir, Director General FICCI, who readily agreed to join us as an associate partner for the event and chair it too. All credit goes to him for the big participation today from industry and media as well. Finally, a big thanks to all our participants who have joined today from different parts of India and the world, some on Zoom and schools on YouTube, where we are live streaming. Looking forward to your continued support and encouragement. That means so much for us. Please follow us on Twitter and FB at the Indian Futures for all our programs, past and forthcoming. Thank you. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhavna.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Manish.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.